I just want to make sure that you are aware that this session is being recorded for both prosperity, and if you want to play it back in your own time, you're more than welcome to. This is a Bristol Conversations in Education seminar session, and I'll introduce both myself and Jules in just a moment, but the focus of this seminar session is on Show Me What You Know. It's an exploration of student perceptions of creative ways of demonstrating summative learning at the university level. I hope that you can all hear me okay. If there are any issues, please do put them into the chat. If you have any questions or queries as we go through part of the presentation, please do offer them into the chat, and we'll be able to address those either during the presentation or at the end of it as part of the Q&A. So in terms of introductions, my name is Dr. Simon Brownhill. I am a senior lecturer in education at the School of Education, University of Bristol, and I'm the principal investigator for this piece of research that was undertaken. And hopefully you can see Jules Godfrey, who is the research assistant for this project, but is also a graduate teacher in the School of Education and is also a doctoral candidate as well. In order for this to be a conversation about education rather than a chalk and talk event, what Jules and I have decided to do is to start by giving you an opportunity to talk with each other. And we'd like to offer you a talking point. So I'm going to pose to you a question. The question is, when you hear the word assessment, what do you immediately think of? What immediately comes to your mind? It can be positive, it can be not so positive, it can be rude, it can be ambiguous, it can be anything that you think of. But most importantly, I want you to think about why. Why do you think that about assessment? Jules is the technical whiz, and what she's going to do in just a moment is to put you into small breakout groups, okay? And Jules will clarify what will happen from a technical point in just a second. But when you get into your breakout groups, it would be lovely if you would kindly introduce yourself to each other, say who you are and where you're from and what your role is if you're a student or a university or a lecturer, and then to kindly share your personal and professional thoughts in response to those questions. When you hear the word assessment, what do you immediately think of and why? And we'll give you about 10 minutes to engage in that. So hopefully you'll have the opportunity to learn from each other and find out about your thoughts. Okay. Right. So the hope is that everyone is back with us. Is that right, Jules?
It looks like they are. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's great. So thanks very much for coming back. I hope that you've enjoyed that opportunity to talk with others about assessment. And what Jules and I would like you to do is to compare the points of discussion that were raised in your breakout groups in relation to some of the findings that we would like to share with you from our research, and also from some of the literature that we're going to share with you now. And then we'll have an opportunity to share and compare that thinking as part of the Q&A in the last 15 minutes of the session. So I have been really interested for a number of years about the notion of assessment, particularly assessment in higher education. And what I wanted to do is to learn a little bit more about it. So let's have a look and see what some of the literature says with regards to assessment, particularly in a higher education context. It's undeniable that the idea of assessment is vital in the higher education context. It plays a vital role as part of it. And when you look at some of the discussions about assessment in higher education, it's argued that it serves as a valid measure of student learning, and that it's a key variable in decisions that are at a high stakes level. But one of the questions that consistently comes up in the literature is whether assessment actually serves as a motivator for students, as the assessment is typically done to and with them. And what's argued in various papers is that assessment can be deemed to be unfair, that it can be an inaccurate gauge of students' ability, and that it also serves as a vehicle for distorting the process of learning. So rather than the process being catered for, it's more about the product. And I can see there's some people with their cameras on who are nodding at these points. So it's good that the literature resonates with your own personal and professional experiences. The common complaint, or one of the common complaints or concerns, is the way in which students are asked to demonstrate their learning as part of their university studies. And when we talk about summative assessment, we're talking about summative at the end, be it at the end of a unit or at the end of a year or at the end of a program of study. And connected to that is the limited suite of methods that students typically are asked to engage with as part of their university studies. So we have unit tests, examinations and presentations and projects, which I'm sure many of you will have experience of in terms of delivering and asking your students to engage with, or that you've got personal experience of actually undertaking them yourselves. And one of the complaints that's connected to these summative assessments is that really these assessments are only used to determine the grades that are yielded from the assessed work, rather than any modification being made to the learning because of when the assessments actually take place, which is usually at the end. And there's more of a subscription to formative assessment as they're going through the unit or as they're going through the year, so that changes can be made to learning and practice and skills and attitude, rather than just waiting to see if it all works out, so to speak, at the end of the unit or course. Research by Seal et al. In 2000 argued that a wide range of assessments actually serve as a motivating factor for students, particularly when there's a mix of the different types of assessment that actually take place. And these can be a mix of written assessments or oral assessments or practical-based assessments. And what's quite current in the literature is this notion of how assessments and assessed work need to be reflective of the 21st century skills, with creativity and innovation being linked to this. And this is where that idea of assessment and creativity sort of fuse together, particularly in my mind, of what I wanted to explore as part of this work. And so by engaging in this literature, what it actually did is it started to ask some questions that came into my mind, particularly in my role as a unit lead on a number of units as part of the Masters in Education in the School of Education. And these were some of the questions that I started to ask myself. How do students who currently demonstrate their summative learning, how do they actually do it in the units that they undertake? Do the students actually like these assessment vehicles? Are they something that they want to do? Why or why not? And through the literature, I was interested in this idea of, well, if there are any creative methods or alternatives to standard assessments that students experience, and this idea of creative touches, variants to the way that students present information on the page or on the screen, how could these be used to potentially engage students and diversify the practices that are embedded within the units that I teach, and potentially other units as part of the Masters and other programs in the suite that are offered in the School of Education. But it's not just about identifying what those methods and touches are, but what do the students actually think about this, about potentially using new methods and touches to their assessment? And it's through asking these questions that this research that we're going to share with you in a moment was actually yielded. Now, to give you an idea of what the literature proposes, in terms of creative methods of assessment, here are a suite of creative methods, and you can take a moment to have a look at these. Some of them you may raise your eyebrow at, how do you do a puppet show within a unit about research, for example? But I draw heavily here on the work of Kent Walters et al. From 2018, who proposes this whole suite of varying methods for creative assessment. Poetry and rhyme may be of interest to particular people in this space. When we think about creative touches, though, it's more about the way that the work that students produce is presented on the page or on the screen or visually. And here is a little grid that offers a whole range of different ways in which students could vary the visual, as I like to call it, by integrating maps and figures and diagrams and drawings, changing the way that the page is actually set, whether it be landscape or portrait, the inclusion of web links and using images and embedded videos as part of it, comment bubbles in which academic staff are typically used to offer formative feedback on assignments is quite useful. So there are this suite of different ways that students could potentially present their knowledge to tutors, and obviously the students can select these as and how they wish. Over to you, Jules.
So the research aim then. What we wanted to do was to find a way to explore the perceptions of students in the School of Education, to focus on how they feel that they are currently using creative methods and creative touches in their summative learning, but also to think about how they could use these creative methods and creative touches to demonstrate learning in the future. How they feel, for example, creativity and assessment can intersect in their studies and their demonstration of their learning. So, having accessed some funding for the School of Education Staff Research and Scholarship Fund, Simon piloted the questions which would then form the basis of the survey tool used with the respondents. A survey method conducted through Microsoft Forms was chosen as the most effective research tool to efficiently explore these initial questions with students. The survey consisted of 16 questions, a mixture of multiple choice and open text questions, giving students opportunities to identify their experience of creative assessment methods and also to explore their perceptions of both creative methods and creative touches. The survey was online for 1 month in November 2021, after which a summative content analysis and descriptive statistics were used to analyse the data. So a total of 27 students answered the survey from a range of levels and courses within the School of Education. You will see that the highest number of responses came from the MS TESOL students, comprising of 33% of respondents. And the lowest number of responses came from the BS Psychology and Education course and the MSc Educational Research course. They comprise of 4% of the total respondents. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you. So what Jules and I would like to do now is to share with you what we call key takeaways. These are the key things that came out of the data that we were able to collect and that we were able to analyse. And so what we'll do is we'll share with you some of the key takeaways that are drawn from our findings. Over to you, Jules.
So in the following slides, where students are quoted, we've used their exact words and phrasing to ensure the authenticity in the data. Key takeaway 1 here is illustrated by one of the students from our Hong Kong EdD programme. And this shows that students feel that creative assessments support them in their exploration of what they've learned, something which they felt that conventional formats just didn't do fully in a way that they would want to. You see there, they've said, I like to explore my ideas using different approaches, but not just essays. Especially for video making, visual images, sometimes they can tell readers and viewers more.
So that's our first key takeaway. what we have also learned from the research is that students felt that using creative forms of assessment offered them flexibility being the key word here, as opposed to the conventional formats that they're used to within the university field and prior to that. And they argued that these creative forms were potentially more supportive of being responsive to the needs of students. So we have here a Masters in Education TESOL student arguing that it gives flexibility and offers more variation. And again, that notion of flexibility came up again because we have another TESOL student who argues that using creative forms of assessment can illustrate their creativity, combining knowledge and emphasizing the use of technology to fuel that creativity so that they are able to present their ideas in a multitude of ways. Over to you, Jules.
So to summarize our key takeaways, students feel that using creative methods adds something new and enhances the meaning of the work. This theme is resonated across the qualitative data, an example of which is given by the Ed.D student here. Graphics, diagrams, and even animations can provide more information and strengthen the argument than text if used properly. You can see from the middle column, we've already discussed flexibility in some detail, so I won't go over those quotes in particular. But the third column introduces the theme of innovation, but whilst retaining academic rigor. And illustrated here by another Ed.D student, students appreciate the need to sustain academic credibility, but they also want the opportunity to innovate and do not see the two things as incompatible. Alternative methods that align more closely with vocational outcomes, but also show rigor in academic attainment. Over to you, Simon.
So we've thought a little bit about the idea of creative assessments. Let's think a little bit about the creative touches. So one of the key takeaways from our research is that students felt that using the creative touches added something new to the learning. And when we looked at the data, we were able to highlight that there were key creative touches that students particularly favoured in the data. So we've got 11 of our respondents who like the idea of being able to include illustrations as part of their creative assessment from a visual presentation perspective. 12 students were really keen on the idea of integrating blogs and wiki extracts as part of their work from a textual presentation perspective. And the idea of using icons and symbols, 6 students thought that that was quite a nice way to vary the textual presentation of information in their work. A simple thing of changing the margins of the Word document that they may be producing their work on was deemed to be really of interest to 10 of our students. And then the last sort of category links to the idea of movement and sound. So we've got 10 of our 27 students who really like the idea of using embedded videos as part of a written assignment to enhance the creative touches that are reflected in that work. Over to you, Jules.
So key takeaway 5. There's a very big echo there. I don't know if that's there for you. Students feel that creativity is needed. So here, illustrated by a quote from an MSc research student, creativity is needed, but they also raise concerns about how this does not fit in with the current summative course structures or pressures of conventional assessments. So there's a concern there that, that the tension between wanting to have creativity and introduce creativity, but the acknowledgement that currently there is a tension between the formal structures and that creativity. This pie chart shows that the majority of students responding to the survey, 67%, wanted to use creative methods and or touches in their summative learning. But 30% did remain unsure. However, only 3% did not want to use those methods. And the key point here is that we feel is expressed by the MSc student below. The most important thing here is that there is choice in how we express our learning. Fixed, dictated assessment methods feel outdated and excludatory and may not really reflect my understanding in the best way. The key takeaway, I think, from all of the students was that understanding of its choice. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you. So when thinking about these findings, what has emerged from our research is that there is a need for more research to be undertaken in this area, because it raises questions in both my mind and Jules's mind with regards to how the methods that we've identified through the research and that students have had an opportunity to explore, how it actually allows the students to access learning and demonstrate their understanding in ways that more conventional methods, for example, tests and examinations, how that may not. With this idea of flexibility, drawing that from one of the key takeaways, we're interested in finding out about which of the methods and which of the touches actually allow the most flexibility and creative scope for the students, whilst assuring the academic rigor which needs to be retained, which can be a real tension in the argument about utilising more creative assessment methods and touches within established units of work. It also raises questions in our mind about whether or how creative methods or touches actually enhance academic achievement. So by actually engaging in these, does this make a difference to the achievement that students make in their summative assessments? And if it doesn't, why? And if it does, why? But for me, particularly as a unit lead and a teaching tutor on a number of units within the School of Education, I'm quite interested in looking at how this research allows us to think about how potentially creative touches could be incorporated into existing summative assessments for different units, so that we can take this research forwards and potentially use it to enhance the experiences of students in their summative work. Over to you, Jules.
So next, this is a small research project, but it has raised some really interesting questions, which is, with the help of the Lever Hume Small Research Grant, we intend to explore further through focus groups of students and key staff, because I think it's really important at this stage that we start to involve staff, because it's your experiences as staff that will help us to understand why some of these things interact the way that they do for students. You will see my contact details here. And if you would like to take part in the next phase of the project, please do let us know and get in contact, because we would be very happy to welcome you into our stage of this project.
Absolutely. The hope is, Jules, that you'll be able to put your email address into the chat for people.
I will do.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. It's really important, before we get into the Q&A, that we offer some thanks for a number of people who have been really valuable in ensuring that this research could take place and that this event could take place today. And so we've identified here a suite of people that we would like to thank. We're not going to identify each person in turn, but if your name doesn't appear on here, that doesn't mean that we have forgotten you, but we couldn't fit you all in onto the presentation slide. But I think that both Jules and I would agree that the people who are in the bottom right corner are the most important ones. Thank you to those people who've helped to organise this seminar today, and for those of you who've given up the time to attend it. So moving forwards, what we want to do is to now open up the floor, so to speak, by inviting you to offer any questions or comments or concerns that you have with regards to what we shared with you. If you would like to ask them orally, then I know that Christy is going to make sure that you are unmuted. And if you would like to offer your questions or comments in the chat, then please do so. So if there's anyone who would like to ask a question or query, then please do. Hopefully, George, you'll have a look in the chat to see if there are any questions that have come up that we may want to start with, unless anyone would like to ask.
There's one here that we can start with. Do you reckon some subjects you can use creativity better or more than other subjects? So do some subjects allow for creativity better than others?
My simple answer is no. And I know that because I'm teaching a unit on the Masters in Education programme, which is called Creativity in the Curriculum. And the research is very clear that every subject is creative. It's dependent on the way that it's approached. There is typically a subscription to the idea of creative assessment being linked to the arts, as in music and dance and drama. But actually, you need creativity as part of mathematics. If you're composing a piece of fiction or a poem, you're creative with the word choices that you make. In science, you're creative in terms of combining elements to create new experiments and products. And in the humanities, creativity is pivotal as part of that. So I would passionately argue that all subjects are creative, and that creative assessments can be utilised in all subjects, depending on the confidence of the teacher or the academic utilising them, and the students who have the opportunity to demonstrate their learning through. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to orally share part of the group? Oh, brilliant. We've got hand up. Denise, I can see your hand up. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much.
So obviously it's been really interesting to listen to this, and it does resonate with me. I was doing some reading about how, heavy dependency on essays and assignments, actually just alternatives to that in terms of writing, rather perhaps a report or a news article. I thought that was really helpful around just exploring different ways of writing. But I'm wondering, obviously this is very student-centred, and I can see why it would appeal in terms of flexibility and options for students. I'm just wondering, has any thought been given at this point in time to what that might mean for the people on the other side, i.e. the academics, the teachers, bearing in mind we're sort of early stages, I will say post-pandemic, please, I don't want to start a debate about whether we are post-pandemic. So there have already been lots and lots of challenges there. So I'm just wondering whether there are any early thoughts around that?
Well, absolutely. And I think that as there's more literature, more recent literature, and they're starting to think about that. Obviously, during the pandemic, if we put it in that sort of sense, there was teachers and educators were having to think in very creative ways of actually doing assessments that already existed, but in essence to convert them online or to use technology for students to be able to demonstrate their learning. So I think there's creativity that's been going on that. But both Jules and I agree that with the data that we've collected so far, we've managed to capture the student perception, but actually we need to bring in the academic perspective, which is why we want to do the second part of the research, and then sort of squish those views together to actually see how are they similar, how are they different. And when we then know that, to then actually go to other schools within the institution, to go to the dental department or go to chemistry or go to engineering, and to see what their thoughts are. So you kind of have this sort of scale effect to actually ascertain the views of students within the Bristol institution to begin with. But then this could be a topic that's explored at other levels. And I am guessing that you work with my sister, because are you linked to the police force?
Yes.
Yes, that's right. So in essence, it's the case of, well, if this is within education, what about the education of professionals in the police force, and how do we educate people in health and business and finance and industry and all that sort of stuff. So you can actually see how this has got real knock-on effects. But at the moment, because this is an embryonic sort of piece of research, we're still learning. So there's a lot of scope to find out about the impact of this. But I think that creative, the way that we actually get students to document their learning potentially has to change, but we need to have the research to support those changes that we may ultimately make.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Jules, can we go back to the chat and see if there's
yes, I've got another one here. When you initially start your research, did you proposedly link creativity with assessment, or was this a trend that emerged throughout the research?
So I forced it together almost. It was in my mind, and I think it was because I was preparing for the creativity unit. So we talked a lot about how we creative teaching for creativity, creative subjects, creative resources, and then I thought, well, what about creative assessment? Where does that fit in? And then I think it was just an initial Google search which introduced me to one particular reading, and that lit the torch paper in essence, and that then started me thinking about it. And also because I'm teaching a unit on the master's programme in assessment in schools, so this is very relevant, particularly as last night we're talking about summative assessment.
I think also for me, from my teaching experience, it's that teaching quite often involves lots of different creative formats throughout the process of actually the teaching and the learning. As teachers, you're continually adapting and adopting what you do and changing things, and actually kind of looking at the strengths of your pupils and kind of thinking about how you can work towards those particular strengths. It's kind of the sharp end of the wedge, as it were, the actual assessment, because quite often we then revert. We've having spent all this time doing lovely creative activities throughout the learning process, we then go, right, everyone write an essay or everyone do some formula. And we kind of lose that sense of that creativity that we've spent so long kind of inculcating on our students. And it seems a shame to lose that.
I think that's right. I mean, one of the interesting things that came out of the literature is that, the standard summative assessment format is the essay. And yes, students need to learn how to do that. But when the students go out into the wide world, actually, they won't be writing essays. They need to develop their confidence in order to be able to deliver a presentation, or to write a blog, or create a report, or write a series of instructions. And if we're thinking about education as helping students to be able to effectively operate in the working world, potentially we should be thinking about this diverse range of assessments to allow students to build those skills so that they are capable and able to cope when they do go into the world and have to demonstrate their knowledge and their understanding and their skills and attitudes in formats that they may not have encountered within their university studies. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Lovely.
I can see a hand up with, is it Mengling?
Yes, we've got Mengling. Hello, Mengling.
Hello there.
Hello. Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's just about.
Okay, I'll try to speak up.
Thank you.
So I teach therapeutic dance, and one of the objectives on my dance session is to teach the students be creative, be interested in the movement. But when it comes to lesson plan, I always have a little bit difficulty because the creativity is quite difficult to assess. What I do usually is I will make a mental note, and I see the student's movement progress comparing to the baseline. So I will know the student for a while and understand what's the usual movement. And then after the lesson, I will have a look how much they step out of the comfort zone, how much they increase the movement profile in terms of spaces they explore, the tempo they explore. Is there any other way that I can assess creativity? And is there any literature that we can actually understand that has a person's creativity is being improved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to share my contact details with you at the end of the session, and you're welcome to email me, and I can send you some useful documents that I've been gathering as I've engaged with the literature part of this research. One of the things that we know is that the OECD, the PISA, in 2021 have actually undertaken a test of creative thinking, which is quite an innovative, it's the first time that this assessment has been done. So that could be a potentially interesting avenue for it to look at. But we know that with the advancements in technology, the use of videos is quite a useful tool to be able to sort of record and play back performances as part of a comparative element. But I'm happy to share with you some really interesting research and publications that offer professionals creative ways to assess students, if you'd like those. And my details will be offered at the end of the section. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Pleasure, no worries. Jules, have we got anything on the chat?
Yes. Do we think that creativity in assessments has any link with motivation? I like that question.
All right, go on then, Jules. What do you think?
Well, yes. Looking at the enthusiasm for creativity from the students and their responses to the survey, I think there is our kind of evidence base already. But I think also when you ask students to kind of step outside the norm and to do things differently, there is always a certain kind of element initially of kind of resistance to change, sometimes a fear of the unknown from staff and students, I think. But actually that when you then see the kind of final outcomes of students working in a more creative field and having that opportunity to express themselves in different ways, which for different students might be different things, actually you can see that really is a highly motivating factor.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think obviously that from our research, be it a small sample, and we recognise that, we had 2/3 of our respondents who were keen to utilise, alternative assessment methods, be they of a creative form, and also to use creative touches as part of their work. So I think that there is a call for it. I think, though, that it's really important that students are well supported in doing this, because it does move practice and experience and capabilities on from the skills that they have developed through their academic career. And it's not just students as well that need support. I think it's also academics and teachers and tutors to know how to use these creative assessments and to know how they can be used to ultimately, assess the knowledge, skills, understanding and attitudes of their learners in an effective and fair way, but embracing creativity as part of that drive. So I think the answer is yes, but it's a guarded yes, if that makes sense. Is there another oral question? Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Can you see anybody, Jules, who would like to ask?
I'm looking. Oh, I can see a hand up. Isabel.
Isabel, oh great. Hello, Isabel.
Hello. That's really interesting, and I was thinking about how that might apply to our dental teaching and assessment. And
oh yeah,
I can imagine some of the staff might be quite enthusiastic, but then others may say, or even some of those enthusiastic staff might say, well, how do we mark it fairly that we're comparing apples and pears? And I just wonder whether you'd thought about how the actual product is actually assessed fairly across different types of things that the students are producing.
That's absolutely right. So as an example, in my creativity unit that I'm doing at the moment, the students have a presentation to undertake and a report, and they are encouraged to use creative ways in which to deliver their presentation and also in the way that they produce the report. Whilst the creativity is important in terms of the visual, of the way that it looks and how it's designed and etc., what's important is what is that assignment actually saying? Because ultimately that's what you're measuring it against. And ultimately, as an academic, I have to mark the work against the criterion descriptors that are set out in the master's student handbook. So, we are encouraging the students to embrace these different ideas and to utilize them as the work. but they are still going to be assessed on their ability to demonstrate their knowledge, skills, understanding, and attitudes. But it's through the creativity that allows you to be able to effectively communicate your ideas in different ways, so that we don't just have to rely on prose. It could be through a poem, but what is that poem actually saying? That's the important thing. So I think that you've raised a very important tension, which I think is going to be something to explore, is about that balance between the creativity and the, the vehicle that's actually being produced. But what is hard about students writing an essay, but changing the background of the page in which it's written on? That's a simple creative touch. Yeah. And if that color has meaning, so the colors might change depending on the sections that are being reported. Is that very hard? I don't think it is. Obviously, if you've got, if the back is black and the text is black, then it's going to be very difficult to read. But, it's definitely something to explore. But I think you've raised a really interesting point for discussion. Thank you. Jules, can we go back to the questions? I think we've got a few questions, or would you like to add to that?
There is a nice actually point which I think does lead into that. Someone's asked, defining academic rigor might be the key, and I think that kind of links into what you've just been saying effectively, because what we all want as academics and as teachers is kind of a sense of consistency in how we apply things, and being able to judge, A against B, and the more I think in our minds that we allow creativity in, the more complex that could be. However, I think, like you were saying, the kind of sense that, we have a set of criteria that students are demonstrating their ability in, and that's how we're measuring. And, when I'm looking at one essay against another, it's still a subjective judgment. It's about having that kind of consistency across the way that those assessment criteria are applied, and learning the skills to do that if assessments are, if we're using different formats and more creative formats, and having the training, and then having kind of the moderation processes that support those things. So academic rigor for me, I think, is very important. And obviously, we can't send students out into the world if there is a doubt onto the rigorousness of their academic qualification, because students have done things in a different way than is the norm, or is against tradition. But I think it is about kind of having those processes and the training and the understanding in place to allow that to happen. Did you want to add to that, Simon?
No, I think that's really well encapsulated. Thank you. Are we able to take just one more question from the chat, if that's possible, and then we can wrap things up?
A question here about research. Will there be further research into the effectiveness of diversifying assessment techniques and the effect on learning outcomes?
I think so, absolutely. I think both you and I would agree that this is kind of like it's a staged piece of research. We've got the initial embryo of this research, and we want to get this to flourish and grow. So we're going to be building up the research in a sequence of little small projects that will build up, obviously depending on the securing of funding, because Jules isn't going to do this just for free, as you shouldn't. But I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that we need to do is, this is all fine in theory, but actually, does it actually make a difference? Does it do something significant to help students in terms of building their confidence, their ability to share their knowledge, understanding, skills and attitudes with others, and to embrace these ideas that ultimately can take them into the working world? And does it give academics that confidence to make changes to their units, to engage learners in the assessment process, so that rather than assessment being done to them, it's done with them and for them as well. So absolutely, this is potentially like a 5-10 year project. Depends on how long I'm still at Bristol for, but I'd love to carry on working on this, because I think it asks, what our research has done in essence has asked more questions than actually answered them. Thank you so much for your questions and your comments, and those entries that you put into the chat. It is much appreciated. As we're coming up to time, I think it's important that we just sort of wrap things up now. If you are interested in the research that we've shared with you today, then please do make a note of my email address which is offered at the bottom of the slide. And I'd be more than happy to reply to you with a copy of the presentation slides that Jules and I have together, and also of the little 2-page summary that we're really proud of, that participants in the research and gatekeepers were offered, that summarise some of the key findings that we've shared with you today. If you do want to know more about the research, please do let me know. If you'd like to have access to some of the literature that I've managed to find that's freely available on the web, I'm happy to share with you as well. Thanks very much for all the time that you've given today. I hope that you found the presentation interesting. I want to give a massive thank you to Jules, who's been absolutely amazing as both as a research assistant and as the technical guru who's doing everything behind. It's gone very, very smoothly. So thank you so much, Jules. I leave it to Jules to say our final goodbye.
Thank you. Ooh. Yes, so literally goodbye. Thank you very much again for listening today. It's been a pleasure to work on this project, and I'm really looking forward to actually doing some more work and actually getting to know some staff and hearing some staff views on creative assessment. So I think that's really important, that next piece of the puzzle effectively. And thank you very much, yes, for giving your time on this very rainy Tuesday. Hopefully it kind of kept you out of the cold for a little while. And hopefully we'll be seeing you soon in some different format with the next step of the project. So thank you very much from me, and thank you very much for Simon.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you. Bye.